Well, historically, the UFC has put on a big event the night before the Super Bowl, and that was originally the case this time around. Unfortunately, due to injuries, we're left with UFC Fight Night 82. It's Johny Hendricks versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. That's the new main event, of course, and co-main event is Roy Nelson versus Jared Rochelle. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani. This is the UFN 82 MMAfighting.com preview show. That is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall. Chuck, what's so funny? I keep noticing you you giggling over there.
Well, you know, I'm just trying to keep the numbers straight in my head at this point,
right,
so
yes.
just going through that, that's all.
And, of course, you're very giddy about your Denver Broncos.
The only number that really matters is 50, Super Bowl 50 Denver Broncos.
That's right.
You know?
No paraphernalia, though.
No, I forgot. To
right.
bring it.
Fair enough. Maybe post-fight show.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the fights. Actually, the weigh-ins just wrapped up. Johny Hendricks made it, 170, championship weight, as Conor McGregor likes to call it. And he's fighting Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. But, you know, the story leading up to this point has been Johnny's weight, working with a new nutritionist, left team takedown. Just looking at him, what did you make of what you saw out of Johny Hendricks?
Well, he looks good. I know he was showing you the abs a couple days ago, and, you know, I feel like he took it to heart, I think, that people were sort of telling him to move along out of the division. But I really do believe him when he says he has work to do. I think he really wants it to be his division again. And to me, he looks great. When he comes in, you know, he said he woke up, I think, right on weight or just like a pound above, which is completely, you know, new for him, I think, you know, because he cuts a ton of weight. So that's the first big hurdle. His fight I always feel like starts a week before he gets in there, and we'll have to wait and see kind of how that translates into the cage. But you got to feel that's a pretty good omen for him.
It's a fascinating fight because I'm not sure who has more pressure on their shoulders. The former champion Hendricks, who's been dealing with a ton of distractions outside of the cage, or Thompson, who's getting a big-time shot here against a former champion in the main event. Big weekend for the UFC. Who do you lean towards?
It's kind of crazy because, you know, Hendricks is 2 split decisions away from being maybe a 5-1 favorite in this fight. I mean, he literally, if he gets that nod against GSP, who knows where we're sitting right now? But I think it's a little more pressure on him because this is a guy. He's sort of now that guy who's in the middle, and there's one of these contenders coming up who has to get through him. And I feel like that's always one of those trap situations, especially guys hungry, probably as Thompson is winning 5 in a row, getting this big shot on a big stage, now it becoming a main event. You sort of feel like he's going to try to seize this moment to make his name in this division and kind of get that spot. So in my mind, to fend off the guy who's hungry becomes the more challenging thing, especially for Johny Hendricks, who's just had to fight guys, you know, one after another who've been at the top of the division, to have to fight a guy who I think is ranked 8th by the media driven.
The so-called media.
Yes. So, you know, but a guy who's that much further down, I feel like the pressure's on Hendricks.
And in my opinion, Wonderboy, pound for pound, one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC. So it's nice to see him get this big stage, this big opportunity to show off his stuff. And, you know, we know what he does. He's so dynamic on the feet. He's so much fun to watch. You saw him against Ellenberger in this building, you know, what was it, 7 months ago, and that was a fantastic finish. And you look at Hendricks' style. Wonderboy told me earlier today that, you know, Hendricks is a little too wild, and he leaves himself open when he's shooting, when he's throwing punches. He thinks he could catch him. Do you agree?
For sure he could. You look at him being such a precision striker, and actually talking to people who've trained with Thompson, a lot of times they think he's that succinct in his striking and sees those openings. Maybe a little bit like Conor McGregor. You know, I think he just sees things in slow motion developing. He understands people's tendencies a little bit, and he exploits them, and that's why he has some pretty magnificent knockouts. And I will tell you this, Johny Hendricks, even though he has that wrestling pedigree, he does like to throw his hands, and I think he always likes to prove he can stand with guys too. So that might be some dangerous terrain for him to get in there and sort of get into a firefight with a guy like that. But yeah, I could see him getting caught. He is a little reckless coming in sometimes. He does get beat up quite a bit in his fights, in some of his fights. So you could see him getting caught in this fight for sure.
Yeah, for Hendricks, it seemed like he was starting to fall in love with his hands. Perhaps this is the fight that he goes back to his wrestling, right? Especially against a guy like we all remember Matt Brown, UFC 145, what he did to Stephen Thompson.
Yeah, and that would be the smart play. It's funny, though, even in the promos, and now this could all be a big troll job, or they could just set up for something else. Johny Hendricks is known to sort of do this a little bit, but he's making it sound as if he wants to sort of stand and strike. I think probably that's not entirely the game plan. I would think that they're going to try to use the wrestling to get things rolling, and if he can set something up, one of his big shots up, he might take those chances. But I cannot imagine him actually going in there and fighting Thompson basically on his own terms.
Wonderboy said this week as well that if he wins, he should get a title shot. And when you think about it, a win over Johny Hendricks, I mean, this was the case Tyron Woodley was trying to make. A win over Hendricks gets you a title shot. Is he? I mean, does he have a point?
Maybe. I mean, the division is just so crazy. You know, you have to feel for a guy like Woodley, who's sort of already there.
Yeah.
But given the fact that, you know, Condit, you know, he's sort of in limbo now, but that fight was so close, you know, depending on what happens there, GSP sort of hovering out there. I mean, if everything sort of clears the way and, you know, none of that seems pressing at the moment, they want to book a fight and he makes a good showing, I guess he would have as good a claim as anybody, especially beating Hendricks. And if he's able to do it in his typical style, you know, he's finished a couple of spectacular fights these last couple. You know, at that point, I think that would even make his case stronger.
Yeah, and for Hendricks as well. I mean, like you said, he lost a very close one to Robbie Lawler when he lost his belt. The GSP fight as well. This is a guy who could be like on a 5 or 6 fight winning streak here. So he has to be in consideration as well, I would think.
He would be, if he just wins these 2 nods, he's considered one of the best pound for pound, if not the best pound. I mean, it's crazy that just some couple of scorecards and split decisions has sort of made him where he's at right now versus where he could be. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that's something to keep in mind. The guy's just really he's never dominated in a fight, and rarely does he not show, you know, his full self in the cage. So I feel like you're still going to see him showing up in this fight. I think he has a lot to prove. And, you know, seeing him come in on weight, I think he's taking this fight very seriously.
All right, official prediction. Who do you got?
Man, I've been back and forth, but I think ultimately I'm going to go with Hendricks. I think he's going to use his wrestling. I think he's going to, you know, set things up nicely for himself and just start to win the rounds essentially. And I think if he doesn't put him away, like sort of late-ish in the fight, I think he just wins the unanimous decision.
All right, let's talk about the quote-unquote co-main event. By the way, how do you feel about the co-main event discussion? Should every card get a co-main event? Or, you know, UFC 194, clearly, if the main event fell through, Weidman, Rockhold, that is main event status. That is a true co-main event. But now it seems like every card has a co-main event. This is a sticking point for me. Yeah. How do you feel about it?
I know you've been on this for a while. You see a card like this and it really becomes true. I mean, because you're basically saying, hey, this is the penultimate fight before the end, which doesn't mean much, ultimately. It really does not mean that much. But I would be fine if they just called it a featured fight on the card or whatever else, or if they just didn't name it. It's just you have a main event and then the rest of the card. I'd be totally fine with that because co-main event sounds like it's sharing in the lion's share of the actual event itself, and I really don't feel like that's the case on this one.
All right, with that set up, let's talk about Jared Rochelle versus Roy Nelson. Nelson coming off a tough loss to Josh Barnett in Japan. Rochelle has won 3 in a row, but was super criticized after that win over Stefan Struve in Melbourne. And you know what? He says, I think the criticism was fair, but guess what? I'm not changing my style. That's the scary part. Yes. What do you think of that response?
It makes me think that him being an underdog is probably not the right call because I honestly think if he fights his fight, that plays right into Roy Nelson's, you know, where I think he'd be in trouble if Rochelle wants to kind of clinch you and put him against the fence and play that game. That would be bad news for Nelson. I think Nelson wants it to be a little bit like him to accommodate him some way on this and swing with him and you know, who knows, get in some scrambles or whatever. But I'm not sure that Rochelle is going to want to play that game, like you said. Some of these guys, man, they have like almost a defiance because they're like, you know what, I'm going to keep winning. You guys, you can complain all you want, but I know how to win the fights, and that's what I'm going to do. And it seems like that's going to be his attitude going in this fight. So fireworks, I don't know about that.
I don't want to criticize him because at the end of the day, you should do what you're most comfortable in doing. So it's, who are we to say that you shouldn't go to your bread and butter? But it'll be interesting to see, especially against a guy like Roy, who's so tough on his feet, if he tries to, get sucked into that pressure and stand and trade, or if he just goes back to the wrestling and pulls out the same kind of fight like he did against Stefan Struve. Yeah. I have a feeling he's going to go that route.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that's going to be the way it goes. You just wonder, I guess, if that's the way it goes down, can Roy Nelson figure out a way to turn the tide towards him? Can he hurt him with something inside? Can he create just enough range to land something to sort of make it his fight? That's going to be the question here. But ultimately, it's tough. I probably would lean towards Rochelle, same way that he's been doing it, just basically just making an ugly fight and getting it done. And I would pick him by decision in this one.
The difference, of course, is Roy Nelson has much better takedown defense than Stefan Struve. And, I mean, this is a guy, obviously, we know about his black belt and all that. He doesn't use it that much, but it's tough to rough up Roy Nelson. So I can see him getting frustrated. And I wouldn't be – this is the kind of fight that Roy usually, pulls a knockout out of his back pocket. So I don't think that that's completely out of the question here as well.
I'll tell you what, though, he needs to.
Yeah.
Having lost a couple in a row, 5 of 6, I mean, we talked a little bit about this on the beat. I feel like this could be one of those – really make or break situations for Roy Nelson. If he wants to keep going, I feel like this is a fight he has to win. I mean, we could literally be witnessing basically the end of Roy Nelson.
Wow. Strong words there. Okay, let's skip over like 10 or so fights and go to the people's main event. Right. The featured fight on UFC Fight Pass. It's 1-0 Mickey Gaul fighting 0-0 Mike Jackson. And if Mickey Gaul wins, of course, he will get a shot against CM Punk. If Mike Jackson wins, he gets a nice pat on the back and a win bonus, I presume. Yeah. Break this down for me. I want to know the breakdown here. What are we expecting out of this fight? Break it down. As technical as possible.
They don't get much bigger than this. This is one of those, you know, the only expectation you want in a fight like this is for it to not be as awful. I mean, you almost have to set the bar pretty low and say, like, you know, I'm expecting to see novices kind of go at it here, guys who just aren't. I mean, obviously, like, obviously Gaul was discovered, and he in his one pro fight, he looked good enough, I guess, to be in this situation. I think it's all geared towards him, sort of getting that second win and making a case for the CM Punk sweepstakes that we're going through right now. But come on, I mean, you know, Mike Jackson, he has the kickboxing. I'm not sure where his ground game is. There's so many question marks. I feel like, you know, what are you going to say about it? Maybe he lands something big and he gets the shot. Maybe, who knows? But I would say to set the expectation bar real low, and just hopefully it exceeds that.
Put a bow on this whole thing, because I kind of feel like I've enjoyed this story throughout this week, and in particular Mike, who was just the opponent, and maybe it's our doing, has become, in many ways, like kind of the story, the fun story at least, of the week. He is playing this perfectly. And you could tell that Mickey, in all honesty, Mickey is saying that I want to go on a UFC run, I want CM Punk. This guy, Mike Jackson, has nothing to lose. You know what I mean? And it kind of feels like he's playing MMA fantasy camp here. You see him out there like weighing in, and it's just bizarre. But he's enjoying every. Put a bow on it. What's your take on the whole thing?
He is. He's on house money. Yeah. You know, it's like he's just out here having a good time. You know, he's like, hey, check it out. I'm getting my boys some Reebok gear, all this stuff. I mean, it's just one of these things. It's sort of like they plucked any of us, but it's sort of in this weird way a masterstroke on another level. And I'm not sure if it was intended, but you book a guy like Mike Jackson, who happens to be media, I guess, in a sense. And who's going to talk? You know, what's going to sort of get media talking other than a media member stepping in the cage? In some ways, it was like this extra little bonus of bringing added exposure to this fight. You know, just for this whole CM Punk situation, which is as bizarre as it gets. But I have to admit, it has been a lot of fun. It's been weird because it's novel and all the things that are kind of going into it, and then having like Mike Jackson on the beat yesterday and everything else. It's been a unique week, and I guess in some ways when you look at the card as a whole, you think, hey man, maybe unique is what we sort of need. We need some extra weirdness for this card to kind of make it more fun. So
this is right up your alley. Yeah. This is a Chuck Mindenhall fight if I've ever seen one. All right, let's run through it. Gaul Jackson, go on the record, your pick.
I'm gonna go with Gaul. I mean, if he's smart, he takes the fight to the ground, and that's about where it ends.
Serkinov, Nicholson.
Man, after Nicholson proposed, I was. But I'm still going to go Serkinov on this. I can't imagine him losing. I think you mentioned he's the biggest favorite on the card, and I can't see a way that Nicholson wins.
Benavidez, Makovsky.
This is a tough one for me a little bit. Makovsky in a spot to sort of leapfrog in the way that we were just talking about some of the fights at the top there. And he's a tough out. You know, he's showed glimpses, and he's obviously the former Bellator champion. He showed glimpses of being a really good fighter. I think he's going to make it. He's going to give Benavidez some struggle in this one, I think, but I ultimately got to go with Benavidez. I think he's 23-0 against everybody who's not named Cruz and Demetrius Johnson, so I think he makes it 24-0.
OSP Feijão.
Wow.
Do you notice I say feijão? Yeah. That's the way they say it. It means beans in Portuguese.
You got to do that.
Feijão.
So I'm gonna go with OSP on this one. Just, you know, he's got the power, and he's able to control where the fight takes place.
And finally on the main card, Spencer Pyle.
Man, this is a 40-year-old Pyle sort of needing a win here. I'm gonna go with him. I think, you know, just having the veteran Savvy's right here in his backyard. I'm just gonna pick him just on his experience.
How about this little nugget? Mike Pyle's been fighting since 1999, 39 pro fights. This will be his 39th. Never been on a 2-fight losing streak up until now.
Wow, is that
This
true?
is uncharted territory for him.
For a guy who started with Quentin Jackson. Didn't he fight his first was like Quentin Jackson? That's a crazy run. Yeah. What a crazy stat.
And what a crazy event this has been up until this point. Can't wait to see what Saturday night brings. We will be there, of course, so stay tuned for our Fight Night coverage. Thank you so much for watching up until this point. Appreciate you sticking around. And Saturday, hopefully, will be memorable. It's UFC Fight Night 82. For Chuck, I'm Ariel. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you on Saturday night.